Well, good afternoon, and welcome back to another discussion of global empires. Thought I'd give you kind of a quick rundown of some of the units and how we are bringing together Global 14 and Global 36. And so I would start with commanders. Let's see, yeah, you can see him right there. It's a commander who is with the fleet. Something that is going to be different than commanders, those of you who played with the commanders expansion in the past, I've talked about it in other videos, but there is a concept that I also want to introduce in the Global 14 update called effective commanders. There are a lot of echelons of leaders, especially in the old empires, where second sons, third sons would join the military, and you would just have this layer of bureaucracy that existed in these militaries in great depth. And the commanders weren't always very effective. There are lots of them, but in order to create that dilemma of too many commanders and not enough of them being effective, and also create an element of surprise. Imagine if a nation had 5 commanders, but could only make 3 of them effective at any one time in the game. They will be able to designate those. Haven't necessarily marked them. We could. And of course, they could be fleet commanders like the one I just pointed to, or they could be ground commanders. But they must be observed and they must be tied to resources in order to be an effective commander. In fact, here's an example of a commander who is not effective. This commander here for the British, attempting to invade Brazil. He was actually from a fleet that was sunk. He survived, was able to crawl on land. And but he is not going to be considered an effective commander until resources can be applied. Specifically, he will need at least an airplane or something to provide him observation, and the British will have to make a decision what they're going to do. In the meantime, he's somewhat landlocked, even though there is, in this case, a British fleet with a second commander who may be on its way to provide relief. Additionally, many of the units that were downgraded in order to provide a stair-step approach to upgrading units between Global 14 and Global 36 were the infantry units, or the Global 14 units, period. So we have early infantry, we have early colonial infantry, we have the naval infantry, we have early mountain and early engineers. Of course, there are trench fighters that come with Global 14. And so those organizations will have an attack of 1, defense of 3. Many of them cost less, but they will automatically upgrade once you get to step 4 in the technology chart. Also, there's early cavalry. I failed to mention those. So you may have a nation like, let's see if I can give you an example. Well, in this case, the British infantry that are in the game are actually early infantry, while the American infantry are what we're calling second generation. Once they reach second generation, they automatically upgraded. So they have an attack of 2, defense of 4, which we're all familiar with. And same thing with the cavalry, upgraded in capability. And so all of the Global 36 values are pretty much the same. So you're going to see that when you play this game. We have kept, of course, Tiger 1s and T-34s. We've kept the French Foreign Legion and Gurkhas. Colonial infantry are available to all nations. Of course, you have to be concerned about supply path and things like that. If you're Germany and you're trying to fight in Africa, how are you going to sustain that supply path? But I don't have to get into that kind of detail. Fighters, bombers. There are early fighters. And in Global 14, we have 4 levels of fighters. Let me show you a great big battle that's brewing over. Germany is actually about to attack Austria. You see a raid. There are early fighters, and there are 1936 fighters. So the early fighters are basically one step. They're like Global 14's 1917 fighter, pretty much. And they remain an option to purchase. They are obsolete, but you can still purchase them. And so they're the perfect unit to match up with a commander in order to make him effective, because they can provide observation while other aircraft do more important things. So there's that commander effectiveness rating again. And just because I happen to be panning to that part of the map, you can see motorcycles right there, which I've mentioned in the previous videos. Cruisers. So let's talk about cruisers. A good example of that is this British fleet. In fact, you see dreadnoughts, you see pre-dreadnoughts, you see cruisers. In this case, we've labeled those early cruisers. They have a slightly lowered value. In fact, dreadnoughts and pre-dreadnoughts we had to downgrade. TBDs we downgraded pretty significantly. So you can see in this case the British player has destroyers and light cruisers. This is my light cruiser painted with green on the tip from my Global 36 box. So he has a mixed fleet, not unlike the Americans over here, who have a torpedo boat destroyer matched up with battle cruiser, heavy cruiser. There's 2 carriers, 1 light, 1 regular, 1 battleship, yet while over there in an American dry dock is a damaged dreadnought. So you can see the compilation of units as they're being brought into this game. Another unit that we had to wrestle through and what to do, Global 14 starts with fortifications. Fortification rules are different than Global 36. So we've gone with the Global 14 version. And that is just for simplicity. I don't think it's going to cause much of an upset for Global 36 as you make that transition. And you got to remember, it's still somewhat of a a fluid time frame. So there's fortifications. Poison gas. We're not going to have 4 levels of poison gas, much like fighters. We're going to have 1 poison gas. You can read about those functions, but those of you who play Global 14, it's going to have very similar functions as it does in Global 14. You're just not going to have to echelon through 4 different levels of gas. It's poison gas. You can purchase it throughout the game. It does provide a positive effect for your attacks, regardless of when in the game you employ that. Another element that continues to come up is facilities. If you look at the Global 36 map or Global 14 map and the Global 36 map, you can compare them side by side. There's a significant difference in the number of facilities. We have the printed facilities, but obviously they're not airfields. There's some seaplane bases. There's our Zeppelin base that starts in Western Germany. You could build more, of course, but there are no air bases. And so we did create a kind of a technological point where air bases could be less expensive for each turn. The U.S. has built an air base. Not sure you could see it. It's right behind that infantryman there in Brazil. And so air bases, if you want air bases, you're going to have to build them. Fortunately, like I said, we did create a tech where those can be, call it expeditionary airfields, but those can be bought pretty simply. And then bombers, you can actually see the MASH of an early bomber sitting here, again, in Brazil, right next to, that is my medium bomber with the yellow wingtips. So the United States is employing both in the game and can continue to do so. In fact, one of the secret objectives is who can have the most bombers in the game. Right now, Germany's kind of leading in that effort. that if you draw that random objective, one of 12 random objectives that are part of the game, that's something you can consider. The British have the capital ships objective. So not only do they have their 2 dreadnoughts that are located here, but they currently have 3 regular battleships and a fleet carrier on the build board, and they have another, I believe they have another dreadnought in the Pacific. Yes, they do. Don't need to pan over that. But so are they going to lead in capital ships and achieve that objective? This is an open game. This is something Tim's helped me a little bit, but for the most part, just this is the 3-player game that we were testing out. So those are some of the units and how we've kind of meshed things up. I don't think it'll be too much of a stretch either way. It is a few more things to remember. So the simplicity we achieved is kind of covered over. One person who was just testing with us this morning said, wow, this seems more complicated. And what he was specifically referring to really is this. Again, it's alliance building. You have to build your alliances. So you look at this map and you go, no, wait a second. I'm the British here and they've aligned Spain, but what's the status of France? Where do they sit on the diplomacy board? And while one country may be at war with another one, a great example was Austria. Austria started in a position of favoritism towards France. France hasn't even joined the game. But other countries, specifically Britain, rolled and moved Austria into their sphere of influence. So there's the Austria-Hungary. That's why Germany is now going to have to go secure her border because of this threat, which you see coming through the diplomatic board, but it's just that makes it more complicated. You have to, it is the reduction of the known alliances that makes it more complicated, because it reminds me somewhat of chess. You have to look across the whole board and think 2 to 3 steps ahead. You do in Global 14 and Global 36 also, but it is less formulaic and more dynamic with the diplomacy situation. The other thing, of course, is the technology and the units. There are a lot of them. I think it'll be an easy transition for most people. But even Tim today realized he was overpaying for naval infantry because he's still in the first generation of infantry that this game starts with. But he was overpaying because they actually cost less, because they're less effective. They look like the same marker is being used for the American Marines now. That's just my board setup. You may decide that, one of the things I've contemplated is like, well, do I switch out all my units when I upgrade to Generation 2? Do I want to take the time? Obviously not on my turn. I could do it while other people are going, but I could take all these gray German pieces, I could pick them up, I could throw them in my World War I box and pull out my black World War II German infantry, and that would be pretty simple way to ensure that I don't forget the characteristics of my units. Does that complicate things more? Possibly, but I think it's just going to make this game more interesting, more dynamic. And so, yes, when you look at those elements, the alliance system and the incremental technology and the objectives, that's what's going to set global empires apart. And we are going to continue. We're going to finish up this 3-player game, at least to a point where we think we understand the outcome and that it's not unbalanced in any particular way. We'll talk about some of those things we discovered even today about the diplomacy and how we wanted to represent that. But this video has already gone on too long. So But we will finish the 3-player game, or then we're going to run a 4-player game and see what that looks like. And we continue to find small things. I mentioned the air defense units and that technology and how we mash Global 14 to Global 36 in the last video. If we continue to resolve any situations like that between now and this release, I think this is going to be a fairly seamless game that the community is really going to enjoy. If you enjoy randomness, if you want to play an absolutely historical game, this game is not for you. So I hope that this is intriguing, and you'll find it interesting when you get the opportunity to join us. I don't think it's going to take us many months to release. Good conversation with Doug today. It's going to be a fairly simple set of player aids that are going to need to be updated. The rule book is being generated as we speak. Since I first started this a week ago to today, it's gone from 32 to 34 pages. Still very short read, and some of that is just formatting so that tables all fall on the same page. Anyways, thank you. Enjoy your holidays. Have a happy new year. I'll talk to you again in the next day or so about the diplomatic situation, as well as more detail about technology. Have a good one.